Hello, my name is Jameson Curry. I'm 34 years old, and if you ask anyone who knows me in this city, they'll tell you I'm a lucky man. A successful entrepreneur, I own a small logistics company, prosperous enough to afford a charming two-story house in the suburbs, complete with a lush green garden and a garage housing 2 gleaming cars. My wife, Nancy, is the kindest elementary school teacher in the world, with a smile that can dispel even the dreariest autumn drizzle. And our daughter, Alice, just 6 years old, is a tiny bundle of energy, always bouncing around with her golden hair shimmering and an endless stream of why questions. My life is stable. Everything fits together and balances like a perfectly arranged system. No scarcity, no major storms, just the peaceful moments I dreamed of as a kid wandering through the nightmares of my childhood. Tonight the air is crisp, a gentle autumn breeze slipping through the window cracks carrying the scent of fallen leaves from the garden. We're gathered in the living room as we do every Saturday evening. Nancy is on the sofa, legs stretched out, reading aloud from a picture book about adventurous rabbits to Alice. Our little girl is curled up next to her mother, eyes wide, mouth agape whenever the characters run into trouble. I'm sitting in my old worn armchair, the only piece of furniture I brought from my past, sipping black coffee, smiling at the scene before me. This is happiness, I think. Not the dazzling firework kind of happiness, but the warm, quiet kind, like the crackling fire in the hearth. Then in the most unassuming moment, everything changes. Alice, with her boundless childish curiosity, rolls out of her mother's lap and crawls under the coffee table, pulling out something old and dusty. "Daddy, what's this?" she chirps, holding up a faded, yellowed photograph. I lean forward, my heart suddenly skipping a beat. It's a picture of my grandfather, Milton Curry. There he stands in the middle of a vast field on his farm, holding a hoe, his weathered face framed by a white beard and piercing eyes that stare into the camera as if challenging the world. Next to him is me, a scrawny 9-year-old, face scrunched up because he forced me to pose for the picture. I thought that photo was long lost, but here it is, silently reminding me that the past never truly disappears. It waits for a gust of wind, a touch, to come rushing back like a flood. I take a deep breath and set my coffee cup on the table. "Alice, do you want to hear a story?" I ask. A real story about my grandfather, the man who changed my life forever. She nods eagerly, eyes sparkling. Nancy smiles, pulling me to sit beside her, her hand squeezing mine as if she knows this story isn't just for Alice but for all of us. And so, under the warm golden glow of the living room lamp, I begin to tell it. Not to boast, not to complain, but to release, to let the shadows of the past find peace and to help you, those listening, understand that the man I am today, with a steady smile and steady hands, was forged from the deepest scars. Let's go back to when I was 11 years old. It was a sweltering summer in rural Midwestern America, where winding red dirt roads led to endless fields of corn. I was a mischievous kid with messy brown hair and a belief that life was an adventure that never ended. My father, Henry, was a construction engineer, tall and broad, always laughing heartily and hoisting me onto his shoulders to conquer small hills. My mother, Laura, was an artist, her watercolor paintings adorning our home's walls, and she'd sing me to sleep with old folk songs, her voice as sweet as honey. We lived in a small house on the edge of town, where neighbors knew each other by name, and weekends meant picnics by the lake filled with sandwiches and echoing laughter. But then, on a July afternoon, everything fell apart. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when a knock came at the door. 2 officers stood there, faces grim, hats slightly askew, delivering the brief message: "Your parents were in a car accident. There were no survivors." I remember standing at the door, hands clenched, the world around me blurring into a haze. I don't recall crying. Not then. The pain was too immense, freezing in my chest like a block of ice, leaving me numb. The news spread quickly. The small town was steeped in sympathy, but to an 11-year-old, sympathy was just distant whispers. Then my grandfather appeared. Milton Curry, a man I'd only met a few times in my life, each encounter leaving me trembling. He was a widowed farmer, living alone on a farm 20 miles from town since I was a baby. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed white beard and gray-blue eyes sharp as a blade. I'd always been afraid of him as a child. Not because he hit or yelled, but because of his presence. He spoke little, but every word carried weight, like a command from the heavens. A man must be strong, he once told my father during a rare visit, and my father just laughed it off, patting my shoulder and saying, "Grandpa's just strict, son." Milton took charge of everything for the funeral. No unnecessary words, no wasted gestures. He wore an old black suit, standing by the coffins like a stone statue, clutching his fedora. I sat in the front row wearing my best clothes, a white shirt my mother had sewn for my birthday, and looked at my parents lying there, strangely peaceful. After the funeral, as everyone left, my grandfather turned to me, placing his rough hand on my shoulder. The first and only touch from him at that moment. "Let's go, Jameson." To our home. His voice was low and steady, without a hint of tremor. I nodded, my throat tight, and followed him to the parking lot of the small church. His old Ford truck creaked as it started, the smell of engine oil and gasoline stinging my nose, dispelling the last traces of the ceremony's solemn air. We drove in silence, the only sounds being the crunch of tires on the cracked asphalt and the staticky radio broadcasting the weather report. Showers this afternoon, skies as gloomy as my mood. The road out of town gradually changed. The neatly tiled houses gave way to weathered wooden fences and stunted cornfields, then finally to the vast expanse of the Curry farm. My grandfather's farm was dominated by a large, ancient wooden house with rough-hewn pillars carved long ago, its rusty tin roof creaking in the autumn breeze. It was surrounded by fields of grass taller than my knees, lush green in summer but now faded to gold. In the distance were the barns, low-roofed structures reeking of manure and hay, mingled with the bleating of pigs and the distant neighing of horses. The space here was vast to the point of being intimidating, wide enough that my footsteps echoed like small thunderclaps, but cold, lacking the family warmth I once knew. No mother calling me to dinner, no father's hearty laugh from the garage. Just the wind whistling through the cracks and darkness swallowing everything as dusk fell. And I knew in the years to come this would be my home. The interior of my grandfather's house was an entirely foreign world. Everything here followed a strict order, a discipline he imposed. The kitchen table gleamed, knives and forks neatly arranged in a wooden rack, and a calendar hung on the wall marked with pencil. Milk cows, 6 a.m. Plow fields, 8 a.m. Check fences, afternoon. No colorful paintings, no toys. Just an old radio on the shelf and a thick Bible beside his armchair. My first impression was a mix of fear and curiosity. He led me down a narrow hallway pointing to the last room. "Your room. Keep it clean. No clutter." The tiny room had a stiff wooden bed with crisp white sheets, an old desk, and a window overlooking the horse stable. No bedside lamp, no rug. Just a desk lamp with a dim frosted bulb, and on the wall a small chalkboard with the words, "Work hard," written in chalk. I swallowed hard, set my suitcase down, and he walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing toward the kitchen. Those first days on the farm passed like an unrelenting storm, sweeping away the last remnants of my peace. My grandfather's routine was so rigid it was suffocating, like a clock wound too tightly, ready to snap if it missed a second. Every morning at 5, the sharp clang of his alarm clock rang out from his room. I'd jolt awake, heart pounding. "Get up, Jameson. The sun doesn't wait." His voice boomed from the hallway, and I'd stumble out of bed, eyes still stinging from dreams of the accident. Dreams of my parents calling my name in the rain, reaching out but never touching me. There was no time for daydreaming. I'd pull on the jeans and flannel shirt he'd laid out, then rush to the backyard where he waited with a bucket of pig feed and a broom for the stables. Breakfast was always at 6. He sat at the head of the table, I at the far end, a distance like two separate worlds. The meal was simple, watery oatmeal and toast. We ate in silence, only the clink of spoons against bowls and the steady sound of chewing. No laughter, no cheerful stories like my mother used to share, and absolutely no complaining or showing weakness. Once I made the mistake of whining about my blistered hands after cleaning the stables. "My hands hurt, Grandpa." He snapped his head up, his gray-blue eyes flashing under bushy brows. "Hurt? Men don't know what hurt is. You've lost your parents and you're complaining? Work. You'll get used to it." His words stung like a whip, silencing me, tears welling but forced back down. His way of teaching was so harsh it made me feel like a wild animal being tamed. He constantly corrected, even shouted over the smallest mistakes, things my parents would have brushed off with a laugh. Leave muddy boots in the house? He'd bark, "Clean it up. This farm isn't a pigsty. Eat slowly after a long, exhausting day. Hurry up, time is gold. You think life waits for you to finish your bread? And forgetting to clear the table after dinner. Oh, that was a grave sin." Once, exhausted from milking cows and fixing fences, I left dishes stacked and collapsed into bed. His heavy footsteps woke me in the middle of the night. He stood there, holding the old leather strap from the wall, not to hit me, but swinging it as a threat. "Clean it now. No one does your work for you in this life." I dragged myself up, eyes blurry with sleep and resentment, hands trembling as I washed dishes under freezing water, splashes hitting my face like tears I wasn't allowed to shed. I struggled, truly struggled. The pain of losing my parents was still raw, like an open wound bleeding every time I closed my eyes. By day, I threw myself into work to forget, plowing fields under scorching sun, hands calloused from the hoe, feeding horses, dodging kicks from the feisty mare named Bessie. But at night, on that creaky wooden bed with springs groaning at every move, it all came flooding back. I missed home desperately. The smell of my mother's freshly baked cookies, the way my father would lift me and spin me until I was dizzy. I missed our evenings gathered around the TV laughing at cartoons. I cried silently, shoulders shaking, hand over my mouth to stifle any sound. Not because I feared he'd hear, but because I feared myself. Feared that if I sobbed aloud, I'd shatter and nothing could piece me back together. On those nights, I curled into a ball, whispering my parents' names in my mind, begging sleep to come quickly and erase this harsh reality. Gradually, through those first weeks of tears and sweat, I began to understand that this new life wouldn't be easy. My grandfather's farm wasn't just a home. It was a strict school I was forced to attend. Every command was a lesson, every reprimand a hammer forging me into steel. I still feared him, still ached for home, but deep down, a seed of resilience began to sprout. But the farm was only half the story. The other half, no less harsh, was the new school. A different kind of battlefield where I didn't have my grandfather behind me with his clear commands, only curious stares, malicious whispers, and a loneliness that crushed my chest. The new school was 3 miles from the farm, a weathered red brick building with a gravel playground and ancient oak trees, their dry branches rustling in the wind. I arrived there one August morning, the golden sunlight gentle but not enough to warm the fear in my heart. My grandfather drove me in his old truck, saying nothing except one curt sentence: "Study hard. Don't bring shame to the Curry name." I nodded, clutching the worn backpack, the last thing my mother bought me before that fateful day, and stepped out, my new shoes rubbing painfully at my heels. As the truck disappeared, leaving a cloud of dust, I stood at the school gate, feeling like a lamb thrown into a pack of wolves. My classmates, unfamiliar faces gathered in groups, staring at me. Their looks weren't exactly cruel, but they were filled with curiosity, the kind that makes you feel like an animal in a zoo. "That's the orphan kid," I heard one whisper loud enough for me to catch. "Lives with old man Curry, the tough one. They say he beats him with a leather strap every day." I bowed my head, pretending not to hear, but those words stabbed my heart like knives. They didn't know me, didn't know my grandfather, didn't know about the glasses of warm milk he left for me each night. But they didn't need to know. To them, I was just the orphan kid living with the grumpy old man, a story to gossip about during recess. Those first days at school were a series of stumbles. I was lost like a boat adrift on the open sea without a compass. At school, I knew no one. The other kids already had their groups, their inside jokes, their secrets I wasn't welcome to share. In class, I sat in the back corner by the window where I could stare out at the fields and pretend I didn't exist. The teacher, Ms. Miller, was a middle-aged woman with round glasses and a gentle voice, but she was busy with the whole class, too preoccupied to notice a quiet kid like me. My grades plummeted quickly. I tried to find solace, even just a flicker of it. Every afternoon as I climbed into my grandfather's truck, I hoped he'd ask, "How was school, Jameson?" Or at least look at me with a hint of kindness. But no, he'd only glance at the stack of tests I placed on the seat, his bushy eyebrows knitting together like storm clouds. "Bad grades," he'd say, his voice icy. "School is your duty. No room for complaints." Once, I mustered all my courage, my voice trembling. "I tried, Grandpa. But at school they tease me." He cut me off immediately. "Men don't cry. You think a few taunts make you weak? Toughen up, Jameson." I bit my lip, tears threatening to spill, but I swallowed them back, knowing that if I cried in front of him, I'd only earn a look of contempt and another line, "Curry, men aren't weak." The pressure grew heavier. Loneliness became my only companion. I longed for a hug, a kind word, anything to remind me I wasn't alone. In those months, I felt like a ghost silently drifting through the farm and the school, belonging nowhere. At school, I was the orphan kid, mocked for my worn-out shoes and tattered backpack. At home, I was Curry's grandson, always measured against an ideal of manly strength I could never reach. Each day was a battle, not against a tangible enemy, but against the pain within me and the relentless severity of my grandfather, who seemed never to be satisfied. Yet amid those bleak days, like a lone ray of sunlight piercing through thick clouds, small moments began to emerge, chipping away at the icy wall between us. They weren't grand or loud, but they were enough to make me wonder. Had I misjudged him, or at least seen only half of who he was? One early winter afternoon, with dense fog blanketing the fields and the biting cold stinging my skin, I decided to act before he could give me orders. The horse stable, home to Bessie, the ill-tempered mare, and the other horses was always my nightmare. The stench of manure and hay, the piercing neighs, and the way Bessie tossed her head as if ready to kick me every time I approached made me hesitate. But that day I told myself, I have to do this. I grabbed a broom and bucket, quietly sweeping the stable, shoveling manure into the wheelbarrow, and replacing the old hay with fresh. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I finished before my grandfather appeared. When he walked in, his fedora tilted and his boots caked with mud, I stood there, drenched in sweat, bracing for a scolding over some mistake. But he only looked around, inspecting every corner of the stable, then gave a slight nod, barely noticeable. No praise, no smile. But to me, that nod was the entire sky. For the first time, I felt acknowledged by him, even if it was just a fleeting spark. I turned away, pretending to wipe sweat, but inside a secret smile bloomed. Those moments filled me with contradiction. I was still afraid of him, afraid of his piercing gaze, his booming voice whenever I messed up. He was a harsh man, with ironclad rules and brutal lessons, as if forging me into a sword through fire and hammer. Yet he was also enigmatic. On the outside, he was authoritarian and unyielding, but beneath that, in his quiet actions, lay a warmth he'd never admit to. I was angry at him for offering no comforting words, no hugs like my parents used to give, yet I sensed a strange kind of affection, not tender but steadfast, like a small flame enduring a storm. During those years on the farm, amidst long, exhausting days and cold, lonely nights, I gradually realized that my grandfather, with all his sternness and authoritarianism, was imparting silent lessons, values that I, an 11-year-old boy, couldn't yet fully grasp, but which would become the foundation of the man I'd grow into. He didn't teach with sweet words or warm hugs, but through his actions, through the way he lived. And I, though initially resistant and resentful, began to absorb those lessons, like parched earth soaking up rain after a long drought. My grandfather's discipline was the first lesson etched into me like a mark on hardwood. He lived like a Swiss clock, precise to the second, never missing a beat. At 5 in the morning, his alarm clock rang and he was already out in the stables, checking the horses or mending fences. At 6, breakfast was served. Not a minute early, not a minute late. At 8, he began plowing fields or cutting hay, regardless of scorching sun or drizzling rain. He never missed a deadline, never left a task unfinished because he was tired or didn't feel like it. Once I overslept by just 10 minutes after staying up late studying, my eyes burning. He stood at my door, arms crossed, his voice as cold as a winter wind. 10 minutes late is 10 minutes wasted. You think life waits for you to sleep in? I mumbled an apology, hurriedly pulling on boots still damp with dew and rushing to the pigpen. At first I hated his rigidity, hated how he turned every day into a military schedule. But gradually I saw its power. When I started waking up on time, preparing my schoolwork before bed and finishing tasks on schedule, things became clearer. School was no longer a chaotic maze. I knew what to do, when and how. His discipline, though harsh, taught me to master time and live with purpose. His perseverance, his unyielding tenacity was the second lesson, and perhaps the toughest. Milton Curry never abandoned a task, not in rain or wind, not even when he coughed through a cold. I remember a freezing winter day when snow fell thickly, blanketing the fields like an icy quilt. I thought surely he'd rest, sit by the fire with his Bible like other old men. But no. He donned his tattered raincoat, pulled on his worn fedora, and went to fix a leaking stable roof. I trailed behind, shivering, clutching a bucket of water, trying to help despite the wind stinging my face. "Grandpa, let's rest and do it tomorrow," I muttered, teeth chattering. He turned, his gray-blue eyes glinting under the oil lamp. "If you start something, you finish it, Jameson. Work doesn't wait for weather." He kept going, each hammer blow steady, each board nailed tight until no drop leaked through. I stood there, soaked and exhausted, but a strange feeling rose in me. Respect. He didn't just work out of necessity, it was how he lived. Relentless, unyielding, like an old oak standing firm in a storm. From then on, I adopted that spirit. When math homework was too hard, when I wanted to give up from exhaustion, I thought of him fixing that roof in the snow. "If you start something, finish it," I told myself, and pushed through, eyes burning, fingers trembling. His frugality and thrift were the next lesson, one I initially found annoying but later valued. Milton never wasted a thing, not a penny, not a crumb. Leftover bread was carefully wrapped, dropped nails were picked up, wood scraps were saved for the fire. He kept a small worn leather notebook where he recorded every expense, from seeds to truck repairs. Once I accidentally spilled a bottle of fresh milk on the kitchen floor, the white pool spreading like a puddle of guilt. I braced for a scolding, panicked. He only looked, sighed, then wiped it up, saying, "That milk is sweat, Jameson. One spill is one effort wasted." I was ashamed, not because he scolded me, but because he was right. He lived frugally, saving every bit, not out of stinginess, but because he understood the value of small things. From then on, I learned to cherish money, even the loose change in my pocket. I started caring for my belongings, patching torn clothes instead of asking for new ones, and each time I held coins earned from helping him sell hay, I felt their weight, not just as money, but as effort, as sweat. His sense of responsibility was the lesson that changed me most deeply. Milton could be domineering, but he never shirked his duty to family or the ancestral land. The Curry farm, with its fields and stables, wasn't just a home. It was a legacy he preserved from his great-grandfather, his father, and now himself. Every morning he checked fences, tended horses, plowed fields, not out of love, but duty. When my parents died, he took me in without hesitation, though I knew he wasn't used to raising a child. Once I asked, "Why don't you sell the farm and live in town for an easier life?" He looked at me, eyes pensive. "A man doesn't run from responsibility, Jameson. This is our ancestors' land. Abandoning it is abandoning yourself. His words hit like a hammer, waking me up. I began to understand that being a man wasn't just about strength, but about shouldering burdens, no matter how heavy. I learned not to shy away, not from tough homework, not from school taunts, not from the pain of losing my parents. I had to face them as he faced the farm and me. Finally, his honesty and bluntness were a lesson I both respected and feared. Milton didn't know sweet words. His speech, though painful, was always clear, never deceitful. When I messed up, he didn't sugarcoat. "You did poorly, do it again." When I tried hard, he offered no lavish praise, just a nod or a good enough. Once I lied about feeding the horses to rest early. He found out because Bessie neighed hungrily in the stable. He didn't yell, just looked at me, his voice like stone. "Lying is lying to yourself, Jameson. Is that how you want to live?" I bowed my head, face burning, not from shame but from knowing he was right. From then on, I learned to be honest even when the truth hurt. I started answering Ms. Miller truthfully when I hadn't done my homework instead of making excuses. I faced school taunts by holding my head high, not denying I was the orphan kid. Honesty, as he taught, was the foundation of respect, for others and for myself. These qualities, discipline, perseverance, thrift, responsibility, honesty, weren't taught through long lectures, but through how he lived, how he treated me and the farm. At first I found them harsh, restrictive, like ropes binding me. But gradually I realized they were the silent baggage he gave me, preparing me for the road to adulthood. Each time I woke up on time, finished a task despite exhaustion, or told the truth despite fear, I felt myself grow stronger. My grandfather, with all his sternness and coldness, was forging me into a man. Not with tender love, but with lessons sharp as a blade, cutting away weakness to reveal the steel within. But as I reached 18, the threshold of adulthood, those invaluable lessons became the spark for the greatest conflict between us. A storm I never imagined would lead to an irreparable tragedy. That spring, when I turned 18, I stood at a crossroads in my life. I had just completed my high school exams with grades good enough to earn a satisfied smile from Miss Miller. The farm, after 7 years, had become a part of me, like my breath or heartbeat. I was accustomed to the rooster's crow at dawn, the smell of hay in the stables, and the rare but meaningful nod from my grandfather whenever I did well. But within me, another fire burned fiercely, uncontainable, a yearning for freedom. I was tired of his ironclad rules, the endless days of labor, the feeling of being a horse tethered by reins, never allowed to gallop. I wanted to go out there, to town, to the city, to work, earn money, stand on my own, live my own life, not as Curry's grandson. I dreamed of a job in an auto garage, or even as a construction worker like my father, where I could hold my paycheck and decide my own fate. But my grandfather had other plans. One evening, as I was wiping mud from my boots on the porch, he called me into the kitchen. On the table was a stack of papers, college applications, a list of schools in neighboring states, and a handwritten note in his firm script. College, the only way. He sat there, arms crossed, his gray-blue eyes icy. "You'll go to college, Jameson. It's the only way to a secure future." I froze, feeling as if doused with cold water. "But I don't want to, Grandpa," I said, my voice trembling with restraint. "I want to work, be independent. I'm tired of always being told what to do." His bushy eyebrows knitted together like storm clouds. "Work? You think being a mechanic or a laborer is a future? Foolish, short-sighted. You want to waste your life like that?" His words cut like a knife, slicing into my pride. Blood rushed to my face, my heart pounded, in 7 years of pent-up frustration. His scoldings, lonely nights, harsh lessons, erupted like a volcano. I shot to my feet, the wooden chair scraping loudly on the floor. "You're always so controlling," I shouted, my voice echoing in the cold kitchen. "You never understand me, never ask what I want. I've lived here 7 years doing everything you demand, but have you ever cared how I feel? I lost my parents, Grandpa, don't you know? It hurts, but all you do is give orders. I was shaking, tears threatening to spill, but I bit my lip to hold them back. My grandfather stood too, towering like an oak, his voice thundering. Ungrateful. You think I raised you, taught you, just for you to throw it all away for foolish ideas? Have you forgotten everything I've done? His face flushed red, his hand clenched as if to slam the table, but he restrained himself, pointing at my chest. You want freedom? Go. But don't come back when you fail. His words were a sledgehammer, shattering my last hope that he could understand me. I stopped thinking. Anger and resentment drowned out reason. I ran to my room, shoving clothes, a notebook, and my old teddy bear into a backpack. I didn't look back, didn't say goodbye. As I stepped off the porch, the cold night wind stung my face, but I didn't care. I walked down the gravel road, darkness swallowing my steps, only the faint moonlight guiding me. I thought I'd go to town, find work, prove I didn't need him, the farm, or his suffocating rules. But after a few miles, my legs aching, I sat under an oak tree by the roadside, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. The stillness of the night calmed me, and his words echoed in my mind. College, the only way. I hated to admit it, but he was right. I remembered his lessons: discipline, perseverance, responsibility, and realized that, though domineering, he wanted a better future for me than the fleeting dreams I held. I was wrong. Wrong to let anger cloud my judgment, wrong to think freedom meant running away. I decided to return. Dawn was breaking, fog blanketing the fields as I trudged back to the farm, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, my heart heavier with regret. I imagined standing before him, apologizing, saying I'd listen, I'd go to college. I'd say thank you, for the first and perhaps last time. But when I pushed open the door, an eerie silence gripped the house. No alarm clock, no call from the stables. I stepped into the kitchen, heart pounding, and there he was, lying motionless on the floor, still clutching his notebook, his gray-blue eyes wide open, lifeless. "Grandpa," I screamed, dropping to my knees, shaking him, but he didn't respond. My hands trembled as I called for help, my voice breaking through tears. They arrived quickly, but it was too late. The doctor said it was a stroke compounded by heart failure. He was gone, silently, in the house he'd spent his life preserving. I sat beside his body, tears falling endlessly. Regret surged like waves, drowning me. I hadn't apologized, hadn't shown him my gratitude. For the warm milk, the wool blankets, the harsh lessons that turned a weak boy into the man kneeling here. He was gone forever, taking with him the words I never said, leaving me with only loneliness and memories of a grandfather who was both stern, admirable, and heartbreakingly human. The funeral was held 3 days later at the small church in town, the same place where 7 years earlier I had stood beside my grandfather at my parents' funeral. The sky was overcast, gray clouds stretching endlessly, as if mourning alongside us. Relatives gathered, but the atmosphere was colder than the March wind sweeping through the fields. They stood scattered in the churchyard, familiar yet distant faces, aunts, uncles, cousins I'd rarely seen during my years on the farm. They came, perhaps out of duty, but no one seemed genuinely grieved. I overheard their whispers, flat and emotionless. Milton? That rigid old man. No one could stand him. An uncle, vaguely remembered from long ago family gatherings, shook his head. Domineering, authoritarian. Lived alone his whole life, died alone too. I stood in the corner of the yard, clutching my cap, blood rushing to my face. They knew nothing about him. To them, he was just a harsh old man, an unfeeling statue. But to me, he was the one who saved me from the abyss, even if in the most brutal way. As the pastor began the service, everyone filed silently into the church, sitting sparsely on the worn wooden pews. No one spoke a farewell, no one stood to share a memory. The air was heavy, awkward, as if everyone just wanted it over so they could return to their lives. The pastor, an elderly man with a somber voice, read a Bible passage, then hesitated. "Does anyone wish to say something about Milton?" Silence. Only a cough from the back row and the whistle of wind through the windows. I looked around, hoping an uncle, a cousin, anyone would stand. but they just bowed their heads, avoiding each other's eyes as if my grandfather wasn't worth mentioning. That silence cut into me like a knife, piercing the heart where regret still bled. I couldn't let him go like this. Couldn't let him be remembered only as a domineering man without a word of gratitude. I stood, my legs heavy as lead, heart pounding. All eyes turned to me, a mix of curiosity and surprise. I stepped to the pulpit, hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the altar, taking a deep breath to hold back tears. "I'm Jameson," I began, my voice faltering. "Milton Curry's grandson. I want to say a few words about him." I paused, looking down at my muddy shoes, the ones he bought me when I was 15, now worn but as enduring as he was. People think he was harsh, and he was. He scolded me for tracking mud in the house, for poor test scores, for crying when I missed my parents. He made me wake at 5, work until I was exhausted, and never offered comfort. I used to hate him for that. I thought he didn't love me, didn't understand me. I stopped, my throat tightening. But I was wrong. I continued, my voice steadier. He didn't know how to speak kindly, but he taught me by how he lived. He taught me discipline, waking on time, working on time, never letting moments slip away. He taught me perseverance, like when he fixed the stable roof in the snow, never giving up despite the cold. He taught me thrift because every spilled drop of milk was his sweat. He taught me responsibility because he never abandoned the farm, never abandoned me, even though I was just an orphaned kid who gave him headaches. A soft chuckle came from the pews, but I pressed on. And he taught me honesty, even when the truth hurt. He never lied, never said what he didn't believe. He was the strongest man I ever knew, but also the loneliest. I only wish I had thanked him while he was alive. Tears spilled over, unstoppable. I bowed my head, letting them fall to the wooden floor, each drop a belated apology. He wasn't perfect. He was harsh, domineering, sometimes made me feel I wasn't enough. But he gave me the tools to live, to become the man standing here today. I just hope he knows I'm not ungrateful. My voice broke and I stepped down, legs unsteady, avoiding everyone's gaze. The air remained heavy, but something shifted. I heard sniffles from the front row. Aunt Anna, his sister, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. A cousin patted my shoulder as I returned to my seat, saying nothing. But that touch told me they'd heard. They'd understood. My eulogy didn't change how most saw my grandfather. To many, he remained the grumpy old man. But for me, it was a way to bid him farewell, to give back a bit of justice to the man who spent 7 years shaping me, however ruthlessly. As everyone left, I stayed by the coffin, looking at his face one last time. "Thank you," I whispered, "and I'm sorry." The cold wind blew through the church door, carrying the damp scent of earth from the fields, as if he was answering in his own silent way. A few days after the funeral, while I was cleaning the horse stable to keep myself busy, a sleek black sedan pulled up at the farm's gate. A middle-aged man in a gray suit stepped out, holding a worn leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, my grandfather's lawyer, and asked me to come to his office in town. "There are matters concerning Milton's will," he said, his voice low and measured. I nodded, my heart pounding, unsure what to expect. A will? I had never thought my grandfather had anything to leave behind beyond the farm and the old furnishings in the house. But I climbed into my truck, followed Mr. Thompson, feeling as though I was stepping into a new chapter filled with unease and curiosity. Mr. Thompson's office was on a corner of the main street, a small room with the smell of old paper and varnished wood. He invited me to sit, pushed his round glasses up his nose, and opened a thick folder. "Jameson," he began, "your grandfather left behind more assets than you might have imagined." I froze, my hands gripping the chair's edge. Assets. My grandfather, who always wore tattered flannel shirts, who recorded every cent in his leather notebook, who taught me to save every scrap of bread. Mr. Thompson flipped through the pages, his voice steady. Besides the farm, Milton owned a small investment portfolio, mostly stocks in local agricultural companies. He accumulated them years ago, very discreetly. Their current value is about $400,000. There's also a 50-acre plot of land in the next county never used. I sat there, mouth dry, unable to believe my ears. My grandfather, the man I thought owned only the farm and a few horses, had quietly built a fortune, just as he quietly left glasses of warm milk on my desk. "It's all been transferred to you," Mr. Thompson said, sliding a paper toward me. "He wanted you to use it to build your future." I held the paper, but my mind was blank. Money, land, these were too foreign, too vast compared to what I knew of him. Then Mr. Thompson pulled something else from his briefcase. A worn leather journal, its edges yellowed, tied with a thin leather cord. "This is what Milton asked me to give you directly," he said, his eyes softening. "He said it's more important than any asset." I took the journal, my hands trembling, feeling as if I were touching a piece of his soul. The leather was cool under my fingers, and as I opened it, the smell of old ink and musty paper rose, like the breath of the farm. His handwritten words, sharp and neat, appeared before me, and I began to read, my heart pounding as if it might burst. The journal wasn't a diary in the usual sense, no long stories or daily accounts. It was a collection of fragmented thoughts, brief notes, like shards of his soul. The first page was dated 7 years ago. "Laura and Henry died today. Only the boy remains. I have to take him in, though I don't know how to be a parent." I swallowed hard, tears welling as I read those words. He had been afraid, just like me, but he never let me see it. I turned the pages, each line cutting deeper into my heart. I'm old now, and the family barely visits. The house is big but cold. Only Jameson, but he's scared of me. I know. I don't blame him. His loneliness, something I'd never considered, was laid bare in every word. He wrote of sleepless nights, of standing by the stable staring at the sky, wondering if he was raising me right with his strictness. "I don't know how to say loving words," he wrote. "My mother taught me a man must be strong, no crying, no weakness. It's all I know to teach Jameson, but I fear he'll hate me forever." I stopped, tears falling onto the page, smudging the ink. He had been afraid. Afraid I'd hate him, afraid I wouldn't understand. I flipped to the final entry, written just weeks before his death. "Jameson's grown. He wants freedom, I understand. But I want him to go to college, to have a better life than me, better than his father. I love him, but I don't know how to say it. If I'm gone, let him know I'm proud. I only want him strong so no one can hurt him." Those words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. I sobbed right there in Mr. Thompson's office, not caring that he sat quietly, sliding a box of tissues toward me. I clutched the journal to my chest as if holding him, as if I could pull him back to say I was sorry, to say I loved him too, though I'd never spoken it. Reading that journal, I understood my grandfather more than ever. He wasn't the cold man I once thought. He was lonely, bound by the harsh lessons of his time, unable to show love except through silent actions. He had loved me in his own way, and I, in my youthful anger, had failed to see it. I sat in that small office, feeling the world shift. The assets he left, money, land, were valuable, but the journal was the true gift. It was his heart, laid open before me, and I only wished I'd read it sooner, when he was alive, when he could have heard me say, "I understand, Grandpa." As I left the office, journal in hand, I stepped onto the town's main street under the pale afternoon sun. The wind blew, carrying the scent of hay from afar, and I smiled, though tears still lingered on my cheeks. My grandfather was gone, but he left me not just wealth, but lessons, values, and a silent love I'd carry forever. That night, I returned to the farm and sat in the cold kitchen where my grandfather's scoldings once echoed. The oil lamp cast light on the journal lying on the table, and I reread its final line. "I want him to be strong so no one can hurt him." I clenched my fists, feeling as if he were standing there, watching me with his piercing gray-blue eyes. "I'll do it, Grandpa," I whispered like a vow. The next day, I began preparing. I applied to a public university in a neighboring state, majoring in business administration, a practical choice, true to his spirit. I didn't aim for prestigious city schools. I wanted to start with something familiar, like the steady, step-by-step way he lived. On the first day of college, I stood before the red brick dormitory, its halls buzzing with students' laughter and chatter. I held my backpack, containing a few clothes, my grandfather's journal, and fragments of a past that reminded me where I came from. College was a new world, full of freedom but also temptations and pressures. Some nights I stayed in the library until late, eyes burning from reading, hands cramped from note-taking. Some days I wanted to give up, when group projects failed due to unreliable teammates or when I got a C in finance, feeling like the 11-year-old boy scolded for a bad test. But each time I faltered, I opened the journal, rereading his words. Discipline, perseverance, responsibility. And I told myself, if you start something, finish it. Those college years weren't easy. I worked part-time at a coffee shop near campus, bussing tables, washing cups, standing for hours with aching feet to save every penny. I lived as he taught me, frugally, never wasting, even when friends invited me to bars or to buy new clothes. I'd smile and decline. That thrift got me through tough months when tuition rose or when I had to repair my grandfather's old truck, which I kept forgetting around. I also learned to be honest even when it hurt. Once I was tempted to copy a friend's assignment to meet a deadline, but I remembered his words. Lying is lying to yourself. I submitted late, accepting the penalty, but the relief of holding my head high before the professor was worth more than any grade. At 22, I graduated, holding a degree. Not exceptional, but earned through sleepless nights and persistent days. I didn't return to the farm right away, though it remained the place I called home. Instead, I moved to the city, carrying my grandfather's lessons and the remaining capital from his estate. I started small, launching a logistics company transporting produce from local farms to supermarkets. The idea came from my years on the farm, watching my grandfather struggle to find buyers for hay or grain. But starting a business wasn't a bed of roses. Some months the company lost money. Clients refused to pay, trucks broke down mid-route, deliveries arrived late. Some nights I sat in my tiny office under flickering fluorescent lights, wondering if I'd taken the wrong path. But each time I thought of him, how he stood firm through failed harvests. I gritted my teeth, worked day and night, negotiated with clients, streamlined processes, and slowly the company stabilized. The qualities he taught me, discipline, perseverance, thrift, responsibility, honesty, became my compass. When a client delayed payment, I firmly demanded it on time, no sugarcoating, even if it ruffled feathers. When employees made mistakes, I didn't yell as he had, but I set discipline, asking them to fix and redo as he taught me. And when the company faced a crisis, like when a large shipment spoiled due to a transport error, I didn't give up. I sat down, analyzed the problem, and found solutions, even if it meant working to exhaustion. Those lessons, etched deep from the farm, turned my small idea into a steady business, strong enough to let me buy the 2-story suburban house where I now live with Nancy and Alice. At 34, I have a happy family, something I once thought would forever be an unattainable dream. Nancy, with her smile as warm as autumn sunlight, is the most wonderful companion. She patiently listens to my stories about the farm, about my grandfather, no matter how many times I repeat them. Alice, our 6-year-old daughter, is an endless source of joy, a bundle of energy with shimmering golden hair and ceaseless questions. Daddy, did Grandpa ever play with you like you play with me? I smile, ruffle her hair, and tell her edited stories suitable for her age, but I've never shared the full truth. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I want to keep those memories intact, like the leather-bound journal I keep in my desk drawer, opening it whenever I need a reminder of where I came from. My career, the small logistics company now expanded to 3 branches in nearby cities, is also part of his legacy. Every decision I make, from signing contracts with partners to guiding employees, bears the imprint of his lessons. Those qualities which seemed harsh and stifling when I was a boy have become the pillars supporting my life, helping me build not just a career, but a life worth living. But the deepest realization I've had is about love, I used to think love had to be gentle, like my mother stroking my hair or my father hoisting me onto his shoulders. I once resented my grandfather for not giving me that tenderness, for only knowing how to scold and command. But his journal changed everything. His trembling words, written in lonely nights, showed me that love isn't always soft. Sometimes it hides behind sternness, like a fire smoldering under ash, quiet but enduring. He loved me, not with words or hugs, but with glasses of warm milk, wool blankets, and by pushing me through pain to become strong. His love was a forge, hammer, and fire, and I, though once resentful, am now grateful for it. I've learned to love in my own way, gentle with Alice, patient with Nancy. But deep down, I know I carry a piece of his fierce love, ready to do anything to protect those I care for. One weekend afternoon, as autumn returned with the scent of dry leaves and a crisp breeze, I decided to take my family to visit my grandfather's grave. The cemetery lay on the edge of town, where stone markers stood quietly amid fields of faded grass. Nancy held my hand while Alice skipped ahead, clutching a small bouquet of daisies she'd picked from our garden. His grave rested under an old oak, its stone simply engraved. I knelt, placing the flowers before it, my hand touching the cold stone, feeling as if I were touching his rough hand from years ago. Nancy stood behind, her hand gently on my shoulder, while Alice, not fully understanding, whispered, "Will Grandpa like these flowers, Daddy?" I smiled, ruffling her hair. "He'll love them, sweetheart." When Nancy and Alice stepped away to pick more flowers, I sat by the grave, just me and him. I opened my heart, whispering words I hadn't said when he was alive. "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. I understand now, even if it's late. I've lived as you wanted, strong, persistent, honest. I have a family, a career, and I hope you're proud." The wind blew, scattering oak leaves like a silent nod from him. I didn't cry, not like the day he passed. Instead, I felt peace, as if he were somewhere watching, and we finally understood each other. His greatest legacy wasn't the money or the farm, but the enduring qualities he passed down. Discipline, perseverance, thrift, responsibility, honesty. They are the baggage I carry, not just to build a career, but to live a worthy life. To teach Alice what he taught me in a gentler way, but no less steadfast. As I left the cemetery, I looked back at the stone one last time, whispering, "Goodbye, Grandpa. I won't forget." And I knew that he, the man who was stern, admirable, and heartbreakingly human, would live on in me, in every step I take and in every heartbeat of my family.